Welcome to Asia Inside Out, the signature podcast of the Asia Society Policy Institute. Asia Inside Out brings together our team and special guests to take you behind the latest policy headlines and provide an insider's view on regional and global affairs. Each month, we'll deliver an interview with informed experts, analysts, and decision makers from across the Asia-Pacific region. I'm your host, Rorry Daniels, Managing Director of the Asia Society Policy Institute. And if you want to dig into the details of the latest policy trends and why they're important, this is the podcast for you. This month, I'm talking with Wilson White, Vice President for Government Affairs and Public Policy at Google, where he leads global teams for platforms and devices, as well as oversees government affairs for the Asia-Pacific region. He advises Google's executive leadership and engages global policymakers on critical regulatory issues in AI, cybersecurity, competition, and privacy. I'm speaking with Wilson today about Google's recently commissioned report, AI Works for Governments, which details the benefits of and roadmaps for adoption of AI services across the public sector. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So Wilson, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And, we're here today to talk a little bit about the latest in your AI Sprinters report series, a report called AI Works for Government. And I want to get to some of the interesting findings of that report in a moment. But first, I just want to ask you kind of a broader question. So as a leader for Google and particularly for the Asia Pacific region, I think you have a really unique vantage point on how AI is being adopted across all of these different countries and economies. From your point of view, as AI kind of becomes a bigger and bigger part of our lives, what conversations about adaptation and how we're going to integrate this technology are you seeing take place across the Asia Pacific region?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Look, the conversations that I'm having across the region are, frankly, generational. We've been through tech cycles before, right? The internet, the move from desktops to mobile. But it's clear that we're not in just another tech cycle right now. The AI cycle that we're in is a fundamental platform shift. And economically, the numbers are pretty staggering. Some projections estimate that AI could boost the region's economy by up to 2.5 trillion US dollars over the next decade. 2.5 trillion. But honestly, that's not even the most exciting part. What's really truly defining for the region in the conversations that I'm in are around this concept of societal leapfrogging. We're
Tell
talking
us
about
more about that.
Yeah. So it's, APAC, if you think about the APAC region, it's a region with immense diversity, immense scale, but it's also a region with some of the most persistent development challenges. So the conversations that I'm having about AI is how this technology can be a tool to tackle those big challenges head on, from building a more inclusive healthcare and education systems to breaking down language barriers and creating new paths for economic mobility. And like what's truly unique in this region is the optimism and the clarity coming from governments themselves. This was actually clear to me. Recently, I was in Kuala Lumpur for the ASEAN Summit, and I was on a panel with YB Gobin, who's Malaysia's Minister for Digital. And his comments, I think, reflected a lot of the general sentiment that I'm picking up across the region, that there's a deep understanding that this technology is a critical enabler of their national development goals, right? The conversation has decidedly moved from if to how to capture the opportunity responsibly, inclusively, and at scale. So to me, I think that's the single biggest opportunity for the region, and it's the dominant part of the conversations that I'm having.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you recently wrote an op-ed for Nikkei where you said that Asian countries are pioneers in balancing AI regulation and innovation. So tell us a little bit more about what makes Asia distinctive. You've kind of described the feelings of optimism, the chance for Asia to leapfrog in its development status. How are governments looking at that balance between regulation and innovation so they can take advantage of all of the great things that AI has to offer, but also do it in a way that's like measured and responsible for the stage of developments that they're in.
Look, it's an excellent point, and it's something that I feel pretty strongly about. For a long time, there's been this narrative that, particularly in policy circles, that you must choose between racing ahead with innovation or being held back by governance and policy frameworks, responsibility, et cetera. And what Asia is doing is proving that this is a false choice. If you want to know how good AI policy should look or what good AI governance should be, look to Asia. And what makes the region distinctive, in my view, is that the leaders here are proving that innovation and trust can and must go hand in hand, right? That they have to go hand in hand. And we're seeing several unique, balanced, and forward thinking approaches that are actually becoming global blueprints. For example, in Japan, with its landmark AI Promotion Act is what they call it. It's part of Japan's ambitious national goal to be the world's most friendly AI country. Singapore, it's been a global leader in developing pragmatic, non-binding model frameworks that are explicitly designed to balance innovation with public trust. India, which is taking a clear kind of pro-innovation stance, not just nationally, but also in its leadership of the G20. It's all aimed at encouraging rapid growth of its local AI ecosystem. And also ASEAN, which has developed its own AI guidelines that provide a great starting point for their member states to be more regionally cohesive on AI governance. So to me, these aren't just like regional successes. They're smart, pro-innovation regulatory approaches that actually unlock AI's potential. This pragmatic, ambitious approach is showing the world how to build the guardrails of the road while you're accelerating in real time. So this is a very different from what we're seeing in other regions like Europe, where sometimes the regulation can actually stifle innovation and slow down progress. So when it comes to AI, we definitely see the Asia Pacific region and its pragmatic forward thinking is starting to pay dividends.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's a really dynamic environment for AI to be taking hold, and I get that sense of excitement from you, and I think from people I talk to in the region about the promise of technology. Interesting to have your take that a lot of this regulation is aimed at building the public trust that's necessary to allow innovation to take place.
Absolutely.
I definitely want to hear a little bit. More about that. Are there any particular use cases that you can think of where there's like a clear pathway between the regulation and the public trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think um, when we think of pathways for kind of building this public trust, we really think about it as a three pathway approach, and some governments here in the region are already beginning to take that approach. So first is how governments are implementing AI itself, government efficiency and fiscal health. Like this really is the kind of foundational pathway, right? We're seeing governments use AI for smarter procurement analytics, reducing fraud. A great example of this is going back to Malaysia and the Ministry of Digital. They partnered with us with Google Cloud to provide Gen AI tools to public officers. An early pilot showed that 97% of users saved an average of 3.25 hours per week, right? And this isn't just like a small efficiency. It's actually what unlocks the fiscal space and the human capital for like this the second pathway. To your point about pathways, and that second pathway is actually using that additional capacity to fund better public good and service delivery. And this is where I think AI becomes a powerful tool for inclusion. One example of this is in healthcare. Um, it means that AI powered diagnostics can expand the reach of clinicians to reach hard to reach areas like rural and remote areas of the country. Our own model here for diabetic retinopathy screening has already supported over 600,000 screenings in Thailand and India, uh, with a plan to expand this to 6 million more, right? That's healthcare. I think citizen services is another example, another example of a pathway here. It means that AI powered multilingual platforms that help a citizen navigate bureaucracy on a 24/7 basis in their own language, right? So, this is a good example of how these pathways can kind of extend there. Those two pathways, the government efficiency, but then funding better delivery of services, I think they actually drive a third pathway, and that is the broader economic growth and prosperity. So when governments are using AI themselves to streamline services, it actually encourages the private sector to get in the game as well, and it encourages private sector adoption. So when it comes when it uses AI for disaster resilience, for example, this is another example. Our flood hub that we've been implementing in Indonesia and India, it protects the economy. So this is how this implementation really moves this from just being a pilot to truly being a tool in a national development process.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good to hear about some of these use cases. I think so often the conversation that we have about AI in the media is that it's, coming to take over our lives or take away jobs or, that artificial general intelligence is going to create kind of a techno nationalist world, a dystopia of sorts. But in reality, when you see the technology hit the ground, it's so often improving the productivity, which is not, just like a dry, accountant's way of looking at the world. It's like really about giving people the data that they need to kind of make better decisions or different decisions than they would if they didn't have all of that crunching power. I think the report, which I encourage everyone to take a look at, builds a model to predict how the adoption of AI by the public sector would increase productivity. And one of the staggering statistics is that it might reduce federal deficits by 22 up to 22% just by unlocking some of that productivity and efficiency in the budget. I mean, of course, governments have to decide what to spend the money on and decide that they don't want to spend that on other things in order for it to reduce the fiscal deficit, but it certainly seems like there's a lot of promise there. Have you
I
seen
promise.
yeah, have you seen cases where, governments have reported back that they're kind of saving money or making different financial decisions based on the AI tools that you mentioned?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we are, and this is the point I was making around the various pathways. Some governments, particularly the governments who are very forward thinking and adopting AI in their own services are already seeing this, right? I gave the example of Malaysia with the 97% of users saving 3.25 hours per week in efficiency. That's one example of several that we're seeing across the region where that productivity is being achieved. Now, the next step, which we really haven't seen yet, but I think the next step of that is taking those gains, those productivity gains, and reinvesting that in ensuring that the citizens are prepared to really thrive in an AI powered economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think this stuff is happening so quickly in some ways, like we do need time to digest it and see where it's going to develop. But of course, we've kind of talked about these various pathways that countries have. One another thing that I really enjoyed about the report is that it shows how diverse the Asia Pacific region is in terms of its readiness, right, for
Yeah, yeah.
AI adoption. Um, could you tell us a little bit about how you see that happening? Like, which countries do you think are particularly ready? You referenced Japan, Singapore, which are pretty highly advanced economies. Um, but one thing that I really enjoyed about the report is that it gives some recommendations for countries no matter what stage of technological development they are at. So, could you detail that for us? Like, what can countries perhaps that are below the level of a Japan or Singapore, not quite ready to, make laws, binding laws about this? What can they do to get themselves more prepared to adopt an AI first economy?
First of all, you're exactly right that the region is very diverse, and that diversity is the reason why a one size fits all kind of roadmap does not work in Asia, right? This is why in the report, this AI readiness framework is so useful. It's not a ranking, but a good starting point, I believe. So we analyzed the public sector readiness based on four key enablers. So one, a cloud first AI forward policy. That's like access to compute power, right? Second is skilling at scale. right? Making sure you have the right talent pipeline and you're helping prepare your workforce for an AI powered economy. Third is modern data systems, right? This is essential for avoiding things like bias and other negative aspects that can come from wide scale adoption of the technology. And then, fourthly, enabling policies, right? A clear national strategy for public trust in the technology. And so, based on this, we identify four archetypes. The first is explorers. These are the countries that are very early in adoption. They need to build those foundational strategies, basic infrastructure, digital capabilities. Some of the countries in the ASEAN region are in this kind of category. The second category we call infra-ready. So this is where some of the other Southeast Asian countries fit well, like Malaysia or Thailand. These are countries that they often have strong connectivity and good cloud infrastructure, but may lack the cohesive governance of the deep scaled talent pipeline to really take advantage of their kind of core assets. Third is governance ready. These might have robust policies, but they face infrastructure or talent constraints. And then leaders, these are the countries that are ahead of the curve, as you kind of mentioned. They have a strong foundation across all enablers and are ready to scale complex cross-agency solutions. So the report identifies India as one of these leaders, as a clear example with a strong national AI strategy, a deep talent pool, and a world-class digital public infrastructure. So if you look across the region, we have countries in each of those four archetypes, right? So from some of the smaller countries in Southeast Asia to India being an example of a leader in AI adoption.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned India actually, because at the Asia Society Policy Institute, we are thinking through the themes that will be particularly salient in the AI Impact Summit coming up in Delhi next February. And we're putting together some information on India's digital public infrastructure and how that might actually be low hanging fruit for other countries to adopt. There are some very kind of simple and logical things that countries can do in the digital public infrastructure space that AI can assist with, including things like simple things like age verification,
Yep.
connecting the digital public infrastructure to the AI tools. So we'll have some more info about that coming out later this year. But I'd be
Excellent.
really curious just to get back to our kind of leapfrogging discussion, because for some of these countries, particularly ones at early stages of AI adoption, I'd be curious from your vantage point how you see them bridging this gap. I mean, we could be facing a world, a situation where the inequality and the kind of the digital divide continues to grow if countries can't take advantage of some of the leapfrogging that might be available by AI tools. So tell us a little bit about how you see that. What can the countries that are at the lowest level of AI development do now so that we're not, enlarging that digital divide?
Look, to your point, the growth is happening, right? But this is the most important question in my mind, for inclusive growth, right? To ensure that everyone's coming along the AI curve. So for a country in that explorer stage, these very, very early adopters, the key is not to try to build the most complex AI model, right? The key is to focus on the enablers and build a strong foundation. So in the report, we talk about that their first priority should be establishing a clear national strategy and a cloud first policy. That's the first kind of foundational step in this. But most importantly, they must invest in their people. I mean, this is why the report states that success is not about people. Success is about people, not just platforms, right? So going straight ahead to invest in platforms without thinking about the people is probably a miss. So this is where public-private partnerships, I believe, are non-negotiable. Governments set the policy and the regulatory frameworks, providing the essential infrastructure of trust and safety. But it really is the private sector that brings the advanced technical solutions, specifically their AI expertise, which earns them a seat at the table. So here at Google, we're deeply invested in this. Today, Google.org grantees like the ASEAN Foundation have helped equip over 800,000 people across the region through programs like the AI Ready ASEAN Initiative. We've also launched the Google.org AI Opportunity Fund, Asia Pacific, to support nonprofits across the region on training underserved workers. So bridging the gap actually means focusing on building that human capacity and what the report calls AI learners, broad literacy for all civil servants, right? And AI implementers, the people who can actually adapt tools to administer workflows. So the foundational investment in skills and in workforce capacity is what allows an explorer, those early adopters, early stage countries, to eventually over time become a leader who have a totally integrated AI ecosystem.
That's great. I think that, the report also details some examples where Google and other companies have developed modules for learning that are useful on, cell phones. They use existing infrastructure. Like, I think it's really important to understand that some of these AI tools do not necessarily need to be the most complex models or the most innovative models running on the fastest quantum computers, but really, there's a lot that AI could do with the existing infrastructure, including the phone that everyone carries in their hands. And it seems to me that that's going to be a really critical piece of understanding how AI is adopted, particularly in the Asian economies over time.
Yeah,
Um,
I like to tell people, Rory, to help address this point. The AI is not. It feels new right now, but it's actually not new. In fact, if you've been using most of our services at Google over the past decade, you've been using AI. Whether it's Google Search or Google Maps, you've actually been using AI for a very long time, which kind of helps ground this need to be the biggest, the best right now. Right, it's a foundational steps on this journey, and I think a lot of the explorer countries are getting that message, and they're understanding that this is going to be a systematic approach to evolving from this early stage to eventually leapfrogging other societies and being a leader in AI.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're totally right. A lot of the kind of most recent innovations in AI, like large language models, LLMs, have been presented as something new when in reality they're working off technology that has been available for some time and just doing it in a new way. Um, I think, LLMs are kind of an interesting case study because I feel like this is a place where public trust is perhaps being challenged. We see cases all the time and hear a lot in the media about LLMs that have, invented data or invented links or things like that, that are perhaps not to be trusted. But as we talked about, public trust is going to be absolutely essential for creating the type of economic mobility that countries, particularly the developing and emerging economies of the Asia Pacific, want to have. Um, so, how do you think countries in Asia build this trust, either through regulation or through the way that they adopt AI? And what's the role for you that you see private partners like Google playing, not just in, helping bring things to scale, but in making sure that AI is deployed responsibly and equitably and ethically?
Look, I could not agree with you more. I think you have hit on the ultimate enabler. Without public trust, there is no AI adoption, period. You don't get the 4% GDP boost or the 22% deficit reduction that you referred to earlier if there's no public trust. So
Right.
it is the ultimate enabler. I think the government's role is to build that trust by setting clear pro innovation guardrails, not gateways, policies that actually protect citizens while allowing innovation. But for the private sector and for companies like Google, our responsibility, I believe, is twofold, right? So first, we must build and deploy AI responsibly from the start. For Google, this is a non-negotiable, and it's guided by our AI principles. And a key part of this in Asia is ensuring that data sets are representative of the diverse, multi-ethnic, multilingual societies that our technology is serving. A great example of this is the SEALD project, SEALD. It's a partnership between Google Research and an organization called AI Singapore to open source high quality data sets for languages like Indonesian, Thai, and Filipino to make models work better for everyone. I think the second responsibility we have in the private sector is that we must be an active partner with government. We can't just sell a tool and walk away, right? This means that we are on the hook for sharing best practices, like Google's secure AI framework to help public sector organizations manage their risk. It means working collaboratively to test and red team and deploy solutions that are proven to be safe, secure, and aligned with public values. So trust isn't a launch day deliverable. It's actually earned through continuous, transparent collaboration and being at the table with government on how we deploy these technologies.
Some of the concerns that you hear as you talk to governments in the region, like what do you think right now are the barriers to AI adoption? Is it simply just the low kind of level of understanding of what the tools provide? Is it the infrastructure? Like where do you see the biggest barriers to kind of widespread and at scale adoption?
Yeah, I think one thing that's actually pretty interesting is here in the Asia Pacific region, the adoption numbers are off the charts. Much so relative to other parts of the world, right? Folks here in Asia are seeing this tool as a tool for upward mobility and economic prosperity. And so as a result, they're adopting the technology at much faster rates than counterparts in Europe or Middle East, Africa, Americas. So that's actually a fact that I thought was very prominent in the data and very interesting about the unique dynamics here in Asia. But more broadly, I think the adoption issues really goes to the fact that this is a fundamental technology shift, and I think people understand that. So there is a lot of fear and concern, but that's happening at the same time that a few other dynamics are happening. For example, societies are now starting to wrestle with some of the cons that have come with the internet revolution. Right, there's huge benefits with the internet, economic benefits, et cetera, right? But now we're starting to wrestle with some of the issues that have come on the other side of that. And governments feel like they got behind in capturing and protecting citizens from some of those downsides. And so there's a desire to not repeat that in this particular technology shift that we're in now. So that's one dynamic. You also have a broader dynamic, Rory, where the geopolitical institutions that we historically relied on to help build kind of um, a global consensus and interoperability around how we develop and deploy technologies is fragmenting. And so a lot of governments are figuring out how do they protect themselves? How do they have a national strategy that is resilient and not dependent on these kind of international multilateral institutions? So it's a very tricky time as people are trying to think about how to leverage AI for their own national benefit, but also protect their citizens from what is largely kind of an unknown set of potential downsides.
Yeah, I mean it's this is an interesting time to have this particular conversation because we've just had these major multilateral meetings. We had ASEAN, we had APEC in South Korea, looking ahead to China's APEC year. Many different arrangements have been made in terms of AI governance institutions. There are AI safety institutes just popping up. It feels like, every day there's some new
Yep.
entity that's been appointed to help us navigate some of these challenges, but it's hard to know where to go with authority. Um, what kind of roles do you see these multilateral institutions like ASEAN, APEC, even the UN, which has its own AI digital governance initiatives? How is that kind of meeting? How are those institutions and those conversations meeting the reality on the ground in Asia as you see it? And what kind of role do these governance institutions have at this point? Or are people kind of waiting to see how they consolidate?
It's such a good question. I mean, my I was at the ASEAN summit recently, and my conversations there in Kuala Lumpur, for me, really enforced the critical role that these multilateral institutions play. I know we're in a period where it feels like the multilateral framework is fragmenting and maybe not as relevant as they were in the past. But I left the conversations there with a very different perspective. It reinforced the kind of critical role that these institutions play. In a region as diverse as APAC, the primary role for these organizations is to be a consensus builder and to help foster interoperability. Now, think about it. If every country created a completely different set of AI rules and data standards and ethical guidelines, it would create friction. It would make it harder for companies like Google to innovate, for governments to collaborate, and for the region as a whole to grow. So, institutions like ASEAN, with its ASEAN AI guidelines, and APEC, with its work on data privacy and cross border data flows, they create a common language and a shared set of high level principles. They provide a framework that member states can then adapt to their own local context, right? So, this approach actually prevents regulatory fragmentation and it ensures that the region's AI ecosystem as a whole grows, that it grows together in a way that's coherent, responsible, and interconnected. So, I do believe that consensus building and interoperability function that these multilateral organizations bring is still critical in today's context.
Yeah, thank you for a note of optimism for multilateralism. I think we really need that right now, and particularly on, as you say, like this fundamental life shifting technology that we have. It's going to be absolutely critical for some organizations to share guidelines and best practices, and to try to mitigate and smooth out some of the frictions that are inevitable. Final question for you. I just was kind of curious about that friction point, actually, which is to say that Google is a multinational corporation. It's a worldwide corporation, and it is, I'm sure, trying to create some efficiencies and making sure that particular standards, et cetera, are adopted. But of course, countries have their own regulatory requirements. They
Tell me
have their
about it.
own kind of ecosystems that they want to promote and preserve. So, what's your experience been like just working in the private sector with the regulatory bodies that currently exist in the Asia Pacific? How have you found that experience?
Well, let me first say that this is one of the most exciting times to be doing tech policy. The way societies around the world are trying to grapple with this technology shift that we're in is fascinating. So I wouldn't want to be doing anything else right now. And then also, I'll say this kind of um, uh, friction that you sometimes see between the private sector who wants to kind of run fast and innovate, and governments who, for the large part, kind of want to have a more conservative approach to ensure that things are being done in a responsible way. That friction, that tug of war, yeah, I see that in other parts of the world. Like part of my job requires me to engage with governments globally, right, in other regions, but in APAC, I don't see that level of friction generally as much as I do in other parts of the world. It's fascinating the difference there. In Asia, it's very much a collaborative dance as opposed to kind of a push pull, tug of war phenomena. But at Google, like, look, we serve billions of users. So we see ourselves as having to be a responsible corporate citizen in order to even exist as a company, right? It's like core to the company's mission, core to our ability to build public trust and to exist. And so the issues that we're trying to solve for our users, billions of users, are largely the same issues that governments are trying to solve for their citizens, right? So there's a lot of shared interest in finding pragmatic solutions to these big challenges. So oftentimes we see ourselves at the table with governments, collectively working to solve these challenges. And here in APAC, that translates into like a close collaboration with governments to identify solutions. So it's a fascinating time, and I think with private sector, public sector, civil society all working together on how we collectively deploy these technologies, I think we're going to land in a place where this technology is going to have benefits that benefit as many people as possible.
That's great. It's nice to hear that there's some alignment there around being practical and pragmatic and problem solving. So, we'll be following this issue of AI adoption across Asia throughout the coming years. And Wilson, thank you so much for coming on the program to tell us a little bit. Again, encourage everybody to go and read the
Thank
report
you.
AI Works for Government, part of the Digital Sprinters series. And thanks so much. That's it for this month's episode of Asia Inside Out. I'd like to thank our team, especially Brianna Entwistle and Tina Menina, for their help in making this episode. Please check out our website, asiasociety.org, for more on our events in person and virtual. Until next time.